So I alluded to Photoshop earlier, and as great of a program it is, it really can't be used to fix everything. Well, I guess really good Photoshop artists might be able to fix everything, but then at that point it's not really a photograph anymore, I would argue, and more a piece of digital art that they are manipulating. And I ran across a website earlier today from Adobe, where they actually were, I guess, annoyed at people for using Photoshop in a verb form, where everybody says, "Oh, that looks so photoshopped," or a variety of how we've really brought the word Photoshop into the vernacular as just a colloquial term for manipulating these photos. And they have, and it's this hilarious webpage. They have examples of what is correct and incorrect use of their name, and so they say, "This is incorrect." It says incorrect : "This photo was modified by this photo was photoshopped," and then it says correct: "This photo was modified by Adobe registered trademark Photoshop," and it's like, who's going to type that? I mean, I understand that they're trying to protect their trademark, and I'm not trying to make fun of them for that, but I do think that some part of us has to accept that there is a reason why Photoshop has become so popular for doing these things, and it is an expensive program, but it does what it does very, very well once you have learned how to use it. And but it does come at a cost, in that there are excellent Photoshop artists out there who do manipulate photos quite a bit. For example, this Time cover was a real cover that ran, that Time magazine ran a few years ago, I think, and it was actually a photo of Reagan, but the tear was fake. They actually photoshopped that in, they modified the photo with Adobe registration program, Photoshop, and added the tear later. And a few people got really upset with this, saying, "Oh, they're misrepresenting the photograph. This is not how the photographer wanted to portray Reagan," it just caused a whole stir. And in fact, though many people think that this is sort of a new thing, modifying photos is actually nothing new at all. We have actually been doing it for almost as long as photographs have existed in the first place. Let's see, I have here something very cool that I think you will all like. So luckily, this is I'll post a link to this website later, and unfortunately, I don't have very good internet access, so I can't show you the live page right now. But even photos going as far back as around 1860 have been manipulated by artists to alter them in some way, and sometimes in a very, very major and very, very real way. Okay, I'm sorry, this lighting is bothering. Let me just try dimming them, or is that better? Oh, how about that? Okay. So in this first photo, for example, this is probably a photo that many of you might have seen of former U.S. President Abraham Lincoln, but this photo is fake. It is not actually of Abraham Lincoln. It is actually a photo of John Calhoun with Abraham Lincoln's face pasted right on top. And I don't know if this link will work, but showing you the combination of the two. Oh, here we go. We can see both. Oops. We can see both side by side. The real photo is on the right, and the doctored photo, the fake photo, is on the left. So photoshopping is nothing new. We could be using a different verb for it, but luckily Photoshop, or rather Adobe, gets all of the attention for now. But there's a variety of examples of this. So in 1930, for example, Stalin airbrushed out photos where he was standing next to his enemies, for example. And so this photo that's visible here is actually, he actually removed somebody, I'm sorry, I don't know who, he removed somebody from that photo, or, well, he didn't, but somebody else did, and they actually did a pretty good job, I think. It's kind of hard to tell, but if you look really closely, you might be able to see a little bit of a bump in the railing here that looks a little soft and a little fake. Pixel peepers, so they're called, people who really look at every single pixel in an image and really analyze it to try to determine if it's real or fake. would do a pretty good job at spotting something like this. But the rest of us would, just looking at a photo, especially if it was just in a history textbook, for example, or in a newspaper, would have a hard time spotting that some of these were fake. And this was, years ago. They've been doing this for a long time. This one's a good one. So this is a heroic portrait of Benito Mussolini, but he had the horse handler removed from the final photograph so that he would look more heroic than the original photo might actually convey. You can see the horse handler over here just holding on to the horse. So there's great examples of this throughout history, and like I said, I'll link to this page because this is a lot of fun to go through and read. And of course, they do reference something such as modern techniques such as airbrushing, where they take photos of models and manipulate them to smoothen their skin or enhance the color, etc. But where I think some of the most offensive ones as a photographer are ones that are presented by photojournalists. So ones that are meant to be photos of what actually occurred, and they have been modified in some way to enhance some aspect of the image. And unfortunately, as much as I respect them and their photographs, National Geographic was even guilty of doing this at one point, where they actually enhanced this photograph of the pyramids in order to fit more of it onto their cover. And so this may seem like picking at straws, and it might be, but they squeezed the pyramid, they squeezed the aspect ratio a little bit so that the pyramids look taller than they actually meant to be in real life. And this, I think, was a misrepresentation of how that scene actually appeared in that case. And actually, there's plenty of examples of this happening even in modern times. Let's see if this still exists. Nope. Okay. So back, let's see, this was back in July of 2008. The New York Times, I think, in addition to, well, actually worldwide newspapers, actually ran a photo that was given to them by a photojournalist in Iran, and I think the Iranian government had somehow gotten a hold of it. And this was published in numerous major not only websites, but also newspapers. The New York Times was included, where they showed a variety of missiles being launched. But when they looked at it and they analyzed this image, they actually figured out that they had added an additional missile to the photo. So they had literally copied and pasted one of the nearby missiles over onto this one. It looks like there's a missile launcher that's just waiting there, waiting to fire its missile, or maybe there isn't even one on there. But they decided to make it a little bit more dramatic and just add in the other one anyway. And this caused a big stir, and was actually a big thing, and brought this sort of this ethics problem of whether or not we should be allowed to modify images with Adobe Registered Trademark Photoshop, or whether we should just present them as they are. Yes?
I think the story was actually that the Iranians were embarrassed that one of them had misfired because they were all supposed to go off at once and one didn't go off, so that's why they wrote it off.
Oh, really? Okay.
My question is, do you think that having this awareness of Photoshop now that it's become so mainstream has actually made it more of an ethical question than it used to be in terms of photo manipulation?
It's a good question. Do I think that the ubiquity of Photoshop has really made this more of a question than it used to be? Yeah, I think it certainly is. It does seem like more people are concerned with it than we used to be. Like, I certainly didn't care back when I was in grade school that Photoshop, that photo of Abraham Lincoln might have been doctored. I probably wouldn't have cared even had you told me. But now that so many people are aware that that images are modified and changed, there really does seem to be this big stigma now, and even in the way I'm presenting it, I'm sure I am perhaps influencing this in some way as well. That modifying a photo is in general a bad thing. And if you're able to capture a photo that looks amazing, like one of these doctored photos, or even this Iranian missile photo, where it had been of the real thing, that would have been great. But as soon as people realize that it's been manipulated in some way, that seems to take away from the skill of the photographer, if that makes sense, and that that person is not as skilled as the people thought that they originally were, because they said they are now thinking perhaps to themselves that, oh, this photo is not as how the scene actually was. It is manipulated, and therefore the photographer is not as good as he or she is presenting himself to be. So yeah, I certainly do think that this is something that is becoming more prevalent and more noticeable. But I do think that no matter what the end result is, photojournalists and photojournalism in general should be held to a standard of presenting a photo as it was, because that is what they are claiming to do, so that they should not be then modifying the image, especially one as blatantly as this. And I mean, it's a very gray area. So once we start talking about stuff like, well, could I really add maybe a little bit more red or a little bit more contrast to this photo to make it pop a little bit more? Is that okay? That's a tougher question to answer, and I think it really depends. And I think even on this page, there's an example of one photograph of a firefighter somewhere. Let's see. Oh, I hope it's here. Oh yeah, here it is. So this photo was taken by a staff photographer for the Charlotte Observer, and he ended up being fired because I think he enhanced the photo to have brighter colors or more saturated colors, so that it looked more dramatic than it originally was, and he ended up being fired for that. And was that acceptable? Was that a good reaction to that? It's harder to say. I suppose it really depends a lot on context and a variety of things, and I certainly am not one to say whether or not that small of a thing was acceptable or not. There does seem to be sort of this line that can't be crossed, but enhancing the color, I'm not so sure. And certainly for our purposes, in terms of being photographers for ourselves, for our families, or even for clients, we generally are not held by these same standards. We can enhance the color, and perhaps are expected to, because if you really want your photos to pop, usually the way they come out of the camera is not good enough. The colors are a bit neutral, and you have to increase the saturation on them, or even the contrast a little bit, to get them to look really, really bright maybe, or to really stand out among a crowd. And if you don't do that, you're doing your photos, well, I mean, this is a bit strong to say, but you're doing your photos a disservice if you're not enhancing them just a little bit, I think, because providing them with that extra pop and sizzle is really what gets a lot of photos noticed. And that is what how a lot of people get their photos known, is by having some really exaggerated feature, something that's really exaggerated in a photo, nowadays at least, that may not have existed before. And so, of course, you can go too far. You don't want to go too much with the contrast or with the saturation, but just adding a little bit, just to give them a little bit something extra, is probably okay for your photos. Okay. But all of this stuff, I mean, this stuff I think is really interesting, and you should take a look at this at this website, because there's a whole bunch of photos that are shown throughout photojournalism history that misrepresent the photos that that they meant, or the scene that they meant to exhibit. So in this one, for example, there's a photo of a fire from Reuters, and they added some additional smoke to make it look more dramatic. But if you look, it doesn't really take much, even if you're not very familiar with Photoshop, it doesn't take much to realize that this is really, really obvious, that it's been obviously copied and pasted. I think my 12-year-old brother could do a better job than this at making the smoke look a little bit more billowy. So this is not cool, because, I mean, not only did they manipulate it to make it look more dramatic, but they did a they did a smackingly bad job of it too. They shouldn't have fired that Charlotte Observer guy. They should have fired this guy. Okay. But anyway, using Photoshop to manipulate images is a tricky subject, as you can tell, and there's a variety of times when it's appropriate to do it and a variety of times when it's not appropriate. For assignments, unless you're told to do it, don't make any modifications, please, and we will know, because like I said, the EXIF data reveals all. But really, when outside of this class, for your own photographs or even for the final project, you'll find that manipulating these photos is a really great way to be able to accomplish a wide variety of tasks on them. And throughout the semester, we will talk about how to do that and how to do some really cool, really neat stuff. So let's take a quick 5-minute break, and when we come back, we will talk all about light.